You think you know the story. A girl in red, a house of candy, a well behind a cottage. But what if the tales you grew up with were never meant to comfort you? What if they were warnings wrapped in lace and lullabies to hide something much darker underneath? Welcome to Whispers After Dark, dark and twisted fairy tales, where happily ever after is never the point. And once the tale begins, it may already be too late to turn the page. We begin with Hansel and Gretel, the black-eyed twins of Candy Cottage. The village of Elderbrook sat on the edge of the Northwood, a tangle of hawthorn hedges and moss-slick lanes so narrow even moonlight had to squeeze through. On its northernmost lane stood Candy Cottage, lime-washed walls veined with peppermint pink, sugar glass windows that caught the sun like spun diamonds, and a chimney that forever breathed out the vanilla scent of slow-baked biscuits. Its mistress, Widow Beatrix Thorne, had baked for the harvest fair since the war. Her crumbly apple cakes were said to mend heartbreak. Her cookies turned tears to smiles. Children loved her, dogs adored her, and even the crows left shiny things on the windowsill in thanks for crusts. One evening in late October, when frost turned the holly berries to rubies, two children appeared at the village gate. They wore matching gray coats too thin for the cold and wool caps pulled low. Their faces were pale as candle wax, handsome almost. But the eyes beneath those caps were not the eyes of children. They were perfect wells of polished obsidian, lightless, depthless, reflecting little but your own startled face. They spoke little, only asking where they might find shelter, voices as soft as dust sliding off a coffin lid. Elderbrook's folk were wary. Fires were banked, doors bolted. Yet the scent of caramel drifted from Candy Cottage, and Beatrix, tending her cooling trays, saw the twins shivering beyond her gate. With a grandmother's sigh, she opened the latch and ushered them inside, pressing warm gingerbread squares into their small, cold hands. They thanked her in unison, polite, distant, too practiced. A draft curled through the kitchen, though no window was open, and every flame in the room fluttered low as if bowing. They ate without crumbs, every bite precise. Shards of hard sugar vanished behind those dark, bottomless eyes. Beatrix poured cocoa. They drank silently until the cups rang empty. "You poor dears," she murmured, smoothing Gretel's hair, though her fingertips tingled as if brushing nettles. "Stay the night, and tomorrow we'll find your people." Hansel smiled, but the expression never reached those void black irises. Beatrix tucked them into the guest room beneath quilts stitched with peppermint stripes. She set a honey wax candle on the dresser, kissed their foreheads, and wished them sweet dreams. Yet when she turned at the door, the candle guttered, and twin voices whispered together, "Sweet dreams, and sweeter waking." Downstairs she banked the stove, yet the vanilla scent soured into something metallic. The cat, old Seraph, hissed at the stairwell and bolted outside. Floorboards creaked in a rhythm too slow for footsteps, too quick for settling wood. Then came the tink, a delicate breaking, like a fingertip tapping a sugar glass. Beatrix climbed the stairs with a baker's rolling pin clutched like a club. The guest room door hung ajar, quilts folded untouched. On the sill, a neat pyramid of teeth gleamed, each too sharp, too small. Outside, the orchard rustled, although the wind was still. She found them in the kitchen, chairs pulled close to the cold oven, sliding their fingers across its iron door. "We like it here," Gretel said, voice flat. "It's warm. It smells like children." Hansel added, "We were hungry, but we found something better than sweets." They turned. Their mouths were ringed with pale crumbs. No, not crumbs. Frost. The air burned icy in Beatrix's lungs. She backed away, heart ricocheting against her ribs. "My dears, it's late," she managed, throat sand-dry. "We must rest." Hansel tilted his head. "We rested once, but the woodcutter's axe found us." Gretel's black eyes glittered. "We rested again, but the flames cracked our bones." Their smiles widened, stretching lips too far. "Now we'll rest here, and so will you." A shape loomed in the window. Seraph the cat, fur bristling, yowling like a dirge. The twins hissed, the sound of steam hitting iron. Beatrix seized a jar of holy salt, kept for stubborn pie crusts and older superstitions, and flung a shining arc between her and the children. Where grain struck the twins' coats, smoke spiraled. They shrank back, voices nodding into a single drone. Hungry, let us in. We smell the sugar in your blood. Beatrix fled to the larder, slamming the oak door. Hands, too many, too small, scrabbled at the hinges. She remembered her grandfather's stories. Roads of breadcrumbs leading to death. Ovens meant for monsters or perhaps for witches. But stories were wrong. The monsters were children. Children that never slept, never aged, only fed. Her trembling fingers worked dough and water, salt and cloves, shaping a crude mannequin. She whispered an old nursery prayer, the one that seals ovens and graves. Flour to bone, salt to earth, sweet to ash, keep what's cursed. Then she shoved the dough doll into the bread oven and bolted the iron latch. Fire roared, hotter than she'd stoked. From the kitchen came a twin shriek that rattled the roof tiles. Silence fell. The latch cooled from red to black. When Beatrix dared open the larder door, the house smelled normal again. Sugared, spice, wood smoke. Yet on the floor lay 2 gray coats, empty. Atop them, a small pile of soot-black breadcrumbs leading to the threshold and dissolving in the moonlight. Village folk found Beatrix at dawn, sweeping ash from her heart. She spoke little of what happened, but she kept the oven door bolted thrice, and no child, black-eyed or otherwise, ever crossed her gate again. Still, when dusk paints Elderbrook violet, travelers sometimes spot 2 pale figures at the hedgerow, their obsidian eyes shining like beetles in a jar. They never knock. They only watch Candy Cottage, waiting for a latch to lift or a candle to gutter. And if you listen, you'll hear the tap-tap of fingernails on sugar glass, counting crumbs the wind has yet to carry away. Fairy tales, myths, and legends, they twist through time like tangled roots beneath us. We tell them to children as if they're harmless. But stories like these didn't come from nowhere. They were born from shadow, shaped by fear, and carved out of something someone once saw. Because behind every fairy tale is a truth too dark to tell plainly. Our next dark tale warns of what happens when the bad seek to deceive. This is the dark tale of Grandmother Holle, the girl in the well. In the frost-bitten hamlet of Widdershins, an ancient stone well crouched at the edge of a thorn-strangled orchard. No bucket hung there, no rope, only darkness breathing cold air up the mossy rim. Villagers whispered it belonged to Grandmother Holle, the winter hag who shook feather quilts until snow smothered crops and hoofprints alike. Mothers warned children, drop nothing down that mouth unless you wish to feed it your name. Yet on the eve of the longest night, a girl named Elsbeth stood alone at the well. Her stepmother's spindle had rolled from trembling fingers and toppled over the lip, vanishing with a tiny plink that sounded too much like a laugh. If she returned without it, the lash would sing. So she climbed over the slick stones and let herself slide into the chill, down, down, until her scream folded under the weight of earth. She landed on loam that glowed faint blue, as though moonlight had curdled underground. A field of bare apple trees stretched crooked arms overhead, each fruit hanging frozen and blacking. Ahead, a cottage squatted beneath a roof of frost-stiff thatch, its gables iced with sugar rind, its door crooked like a smirk. An iron sign creaked above the lintel, letters spider-webbed with rust. Candy Cottage, guests welcome, debts paid. Elsbeth's breath smoked before her. She pushed the door. Inside, a hearth purred with blue-white fire. The air smelled of cloves, and something older, like snow melting on bone. At a long table sat Grandmother Holle herself, hair flat as mortar snow, eyes clouded as river ice, lips thin and colorless. She beckoned Elsbeth with a crooked finger, voice soft enough to peel skin from courage. Child, the spindle you seek pricked my realm. Nothing enters without owing. Work, and perhaps you may climb out again, whole. 3 tasks, she said. 1. Stir the cauldron where storm clouds boil till they scream white flakes. 2. Strip the orchard's black apples and seed them with stars so dawn might rise. 3. Carry a pillow taller than herself up the crooked attic stair, then shake it until the first crow of morning. Elsbeth labored, arms quivering, skin blistered by iron frost. The cauldron hissed like a throat clearing to sing. Snow began to fall in her own world overhead. She plucked apples that bled midnight sap, pressed shards of starlight into their wounds, and watched them glow with captive dawn. Last, she climbed the attic, quill feathers whispering under ticking. When she shook, blizzards roared out between rafters, howling across both worlds at once. Grandmother Holly's eyes glimmered. "Diligent little sparrow," she crooned. "You've earned your release." She led Elspeth to a wooden trapdoor in the floor. "Step through. Hold your breath." Snowflakes rose around her, spinning upward like ash through fire. Elspeth dropped and burst from the village well, gasping, hair crusted with frost. She stumbled into the orchard where sunlight pierced the gray dawn, and from the clouds above, coins began to fall, real ones. Shiny gold coins that clattered against stone and soil. Dozens. Hundreds. The orchard rang with their landing. Villagers rushed to her, voices lifted in awe and hunger. Her stepmother, sharp-eyed, breathless, pushed her way to the front, scooping up coins with shaking hands. "What did you do?" she hissed. "Where did it come from?" Elspeth only said, "I worked, and I did." That night, the stepmother fed greed into her own daughter like wine, telling her the well would make her rich, richer than Elspeth, richer than the widow, richer than the miller's son she'd been sweet on since summer. So Hilda went. She brought no spindle, just a cracked wooden spoon she flung into the dark, then followed it down with a laugh. At the bottom, the frost field was still. The trees trembled. The cottage door stood open. Grandmother Holly offered the same 3 tasks, her white eyes glittering with the weight of old judgment. But Hilda stirred the cauldron only once, then let it boil over. She gorged on the orchard, ripping fruit from the branches, juice slick on her chin, the seeds rattling from her teeth as she spat them into the frost. She dragged the pillow to the attic and dropped it against a crooked chair before curling up to sleep. "Finished," she told the crone, smug. Grandmother Hall did not answer. She only raised one crooked hand and pointed, not to the trapdoor, not to the stair, but to the cellar. An iron hatch sat there, black and rust-bolted. She pulled it open, the hinges screaming. Hilda sneered, full of defiance, but when she leaned close, peering into the black, the old woman gave a gentle push. Hilda toppled into the void, her scream snuffed out as the hatch slammed shut. Grandmother Holly slid the bolt home. A breath of black mist slipped through the cracks and then hovered near Grandma Holly for only a moment as she pointed trapdoor that led to the well. What crawled out of the well a few moments later wasn't Hilda. Not anymore. It wore her clothes, her boots, her outline, but her skin gleamed tar black, dripping and smoking where sunlight touched. Her hair ran in oily ropes. Her eyes were pits packed with ash and cold, staring without blinking. Wherever she stepped, the ground withered, grass turning black, frost melting into puddles that froze wrong. Her mouth was stitched shut, not with thread, with spider legs that twitched as if alive. Her mother stood paralyzed as the thing raised one hand, trembling in a soundless scream, then seized her by the arm. The woman fainted, limp, as the creature dragged her toward the orchard path. It looked once toward Elspeth, long enough for the girl to see nothing human left inside, then turned away. Slowly, relentlessly, it hauled its mother back to the well. They vanished together, swallowed whole. By morning, the well was gone. But when the wind howls through the valley, they say you can still hear water boiling, still hear the rasp of snow-feather pillows being shaken deep underground. And sometimes on the orchard frost where silver coins once fell, black footprints appear overnight. They don't lead away. They don't wander. They only march in a straight line, right back to where the well once stood. So mind your step when the first snows fall, because Grandmother Holly still watches through the cracks in her oven door, and she knows who works, who lies, and those whose mouths must be stitched shut. Legends cling to us for a reason. Fairy tales, myths, and warnings, they twist through time like roots beneath our feet. We dress them up for children, but the truth was never gentle. Red hoods, dark woods, and wolves with human eyes weren't born from imagination. Because some stories don't end with happily ever after. They end with blood on the snow and something hungry waiting in the trees. This is the dark tale of Red Riding Hood and the wolf within. Moonsilver fog clung to the firs of Germany's Schwarzwald, the Black Forest, when Anneliese, called Red for the scarlet cloak her mother stitched for her, left the village of Dornholtz. In her basket, dark rye, smoked venison, and a flask of wine for grandmother Ilse, who lived 3 leagues deep beyond the charcoal kilns. Folk said the pines there whispered when the wind was right, and in a tongue older than bone when it wasn't. Halfway along the hunter's path, Red met a wolf, taller than her shoulder, black as a cellar's last corner. Its eyes gleamed yellow, but its grin held something almost human, as though it found a private joke in her steady heartbeat. She froze, it leapt, teeth split closed, skin, muscle. The forest rang with one scream and then only ravens. Yet when the fog lifted, she sat alone beneath the pines, tooth marks burning on her arms. The wolf was gone, leaving paw prints that ended in bare footprints pressed into the damp earth, as though it had shrugged off its pelt and walked away whistling. Shaken, she bound the wound and hurried on. Grandmother Ilse fussed over her bandage, brewed some tea and stoked the hearth, but nothing banished the ache that gnawed deeper each hour. Night fell. Clouds hid the half-grown moon. Red dreamed of running, four-legged, swift, joyful, while the trees bent aside like courtiers for a queen. 3 nights later, the full moon climbed above the pines, a white coin hammered thin. Red's fever broke with a snap of bone. Fingers lengthened into claws, jaw split to birth a muzzle, and her scream slid into a howl that rattled every shutter in Dornholtz. The wolf stepped from her skin like a snake slithering free of its burial shroud, a sleek she-beast wearing tatters of red wool. She hunted the lanes first, goats, geese, the smith caught at his forge. Blood painted the cobbles, bells tolled until throats shredded from terror. By dawn, she had vanished into the timber, her pursuers leaving hoof prints beside paw prints, as if prey and predator shared the same dark dance. Grandmother Ilse prayed behind bolted doors, but prayers blow thin in the black forest. The next full moon drew Red back, hunger sharpening her ribs. She stalked the cottage, growling and calling out to her grandmother to open the door and let her in. Her pleads became so desperate that the old woman opened the door. But the red glowing eyes staring back at her was not her granddaughter's, but a thing of fear and legend. A werewolf, coat gleaming in the moonlight as a low growl rumbled in its throat. Suddenly an arrow hissed past the wolf's ear, silver-tipped. It cracked against bark, searing smoke. From the shadows stepped Falk, the village woodsman, though no mere logger. Chainmail lined with wolfsbane stems clung to his shoulders, and at his belt hung blades hammered silver bright as moonlight. He had hunted shape-stealers from Bavaria to Bohemia and knew the stench of cursed blood. Red's snarl bent into a laugh, thin and hollow. Falk circled her, axe lifted, voice low as a storm gun. "Come back, child. Fight it." But the beast inside her only stretched wider, delighted by its new skin. She feinted once, then vanished between the trees, quicker than breath, leaving only snow unsettled in her wake. At dawn, Falk found clawed tracks veering into barefoot prints, racing north through the Hohental Gorge. Grandmother Ilse still clutched her lantern, hands shaking, while Dornholtz lay broken behind them. Doors caved in, pews split, the bell tower scorched black where the wolf had howled at the sky. Now each month the hunter threads silver wire along the forest paths, waiting for the sound of padded steps that once belonged to a girl in a red hood. Some say she lingers on the ridges, moon flashing off her claws. Others swear they've heard her hum, a lullaby remembered wrong, just before the killing starts. The Schwarzwald is wide, old, hungry. And though Falk sharpens his silver and the villagers pray for dawn, Red walks it still, the wolf in her patient as winter and twice as cruel. We've all grown up with legends, fairy tales, and lullabies. But in our next story, Dance with the Dead and 12 Dancing Princesses, the ballroom reeks of decay, slippers shred by dawn, and the waltz is plagued by no living hands. Because in this tale, partners are corpses, and the dance never ends. In the old kingdom of Velstadt, far beyond the salt marshes and whispering pine, there lived 12 princesses, each more beautiful than the last, and each bound by a curse their father refused to see. Every morning, their silk slippers were torn through at the toes. Every night, their doors were locked from the outside, guarded by men who never heard a sound. Yet every dawn brought bruises beneath their eyes, silver dust on their gowns, and the scent of damp soil clinging to their hair. Desperate, the king proclaimed that whoever uncovered the secret of where his daughters vanished each night would be rewarded with marriage to a princess of his choosing. But failure meant death. Knights, scholars, and even princes tried. None returned. But Corin, captain of the palace guard, stepped forward for no reward of gold or throne. He had loved the eldest daughter, Princess Adelheid, since the summer they chased fireflies in the orchard when they were children. He would follow her into any darkness, even one that tasted of graves. He'd heard the rumors that the palace was built atop a ruined crypt, that the queen had died in childbirth and something had been taken from the tomb that night. He watched the daughters, how they laughed too loud at dusk and walked too slow in daylight. How none would speak of dreams, though fear lined their eyes when dusk fell. Corin had been warned by an old woman in the market about the dance of the dead deep below the palace, so he hid in the girls' rooms and waited till they fell asleep. At midnight, he heard it, a low hum, like a violin bow against bone. The eldest sister, Adelheid, rose first. She whispered something in a language that cracked the air. One by one, the others followed, stepping barefoot across the stone floor in perfect silence. Adelheid tapped the bedpost 3 times, and the floor opened. Not a trapdoor, a hole, an ancient wound in the earth's skin. Cold air spilled upward. One by one, the sisters descended a spiral stair made of skeleton bones into darkness lit with bluish light. Corin followed, cloaked in shadows, holding a sprig of wolfsbane in his teeth, just as the old woman had instructed. They emerged beneath the palace foundations into a forest of petrified trees, bleached to ghostly ivory. Each trunk was studded with candle stubs burning with cold, corpse-blue flames. The ground was soft and uneven. When Corin knelt, he saw it wasn't moss at all, but grave soil, threaded with finger bones that clacked as the sisters passed. Waiting at the forest edge stood 12 black carriages, each pulled by skeletal chargers, whose manes were strings of shadow. The princesses stepped inside. Corin clung to the axle of the last coach, the iron charm biting his palms. Hooves struck sparks that smelled of rusted coffins until they arrived at a palace beneath the earth, tall, twisted, built from the bones of long-dead kings. Candlelight flickered in chandeliers made of vertebrae and teeth. A great ballroom stretched beyond, filled with suitors, each in finery from centuries past, skin gray and sunken, eyes glowing like old coals. 1,000 candles floated in midair, their flames languid and pale. Music rose, violins pitched just below human hearing, cellos groaning like doors in crypts. Dancers filled the ballroom, kings whose crowns had fused to their cracked skulls, brides in rotted satin, ribs laced with cobweb, and courtiers whose eyes glowed ember red in worm-eaten sockets. Some were nearly skeletons, others half mummified. Scraps of velvet clung to desiccated limbs. Gold rings circled finger bones. Tongues of grave mold flickered where hearts had once beat. When the first note struck, the princesses curtsied and the dead bowed low. Hands, cold as river stones, took theirs, and the dance began. They waltzed across black marble veined with crackling lightning, skirts spinning petals of dust, spinning and twirling with corpses in rotted velvet, their hands stained with grave dust. Laughter echoed hollowly. Strings sang from unseen players. Blood dripped onto the marble with each step, but the princesses never faltered. Corin watched in horror. He picked up a goblet left on a banquet table, silver, crusted red inside, his proof for the king. The clock struck 6. The sisters, exhausted, collapsed into the arms of their partners. The music faded, and the dead began to whisper. Corin turned to flee, but one of the suitors was already watching him. Its face was hollow beneath its mask. Its mouth didn't move, but its voice slid into Corin's ears like smoke. "You weren't invited." He ran, through the black forest and past reaching arms and grinding bone. The spiral bone staircase twisted beneath his feet. He burst through the floor just as the sun crested the horizon. The sisters returned to their beds, breathless and pale. The trapdoor sealed behind them. Their slippers lay in pieces by the fire. That morning, Corin stood before the king and told all, showed the goblet. The sisters wept, not in shame, but in fear. "You don't understand," Adelheid whispered. "We didn't choose to dance. If we don't, the dead come and take us." The king, furious and afraid, ordered the passage sealed, and the ballroom beneath the castle burned, stone, ash, and bone alike. But that night, one sister vanished, then another, then a third. Only Adelheid remained. At the king's command, Corin wed her and took her far from Velstadt's cursed walls. For a time, peace returned. A year later, their first child was born, a daughter with her mother's eyes and her father's quiet soul. But on the night of the first frost, Adelheid vanished. She slipped from their bed without a sound and was seen last beside the courtyard well, cradling the child in her arms and clutching a pair of worn, tattered slippers. She sang a lullaby too old for any cradle, soft, broken, and full of sorrow. By dawn, Corin woke to an empty bed and cold sheets. He searched the palace until his voice cracked, but all he found was their sleeping child wrapped in Adelheid's cloak, and a trail of barefoot prints leading to the oldest gate of the graveyard, where the path ended and the tracks simply stopped. Now, on nights when the fire burns low and the nursery grows still, Corin swears he can hear music, distant, slow, and drifting up through the floorboards. As if somewhere far below, the waltz is starting again. And in the cradle's shadow, the baby sometimes smiles and taps her foot to a rhythm only she can hear. In our last tale tonight, we bring you a dark and twisted retelling of the Pied Piper of Hamelin. The villagers begged him to rid their town of vermin, and he did. But when they refused to pay the price, his song returned, not as salvation, but as vengeance. And what he took in the dead of night was far worse than rats. It was their children. Hamelin's plague began with whispers, tiny claw scrapes in the walls, wet chewing in the eaves, until the rats spilled into daylight like a living flood. They gnawed wheat in the granaries, fouled the wells, and dragged infants from cradles with silk-thin teeth. The burgomaster's guards slashed and burned, yet the rats only bred faster, sleek and bright-eyed, as though some deeper appetite guided them. Then, on the longest dusk of midsummer, a stranger walked out of the river fog. His coat was dusk-red brocade stitched with thorns, and his tall hat bent like a candle flame. At his lips he held a flute carved from something pale and porous. Bone, perhaps, though no bone meant for music. He did not play. He simply waited in the market square until the bell struck 7. The burgomaster, desperate, offered gold for deliverance. The stranger's mouth curved, too many teeth for one smile, and he nodded once. He lifted the flute. The first note sounded thin as spider silk. yet it seeped through stone and wood, through marrow and memory. Rats poured from cellars, gutters, granaries, an ocean of slick fur and needle tails. They swarmed the piper's boots, writhing against one another, and when he turned toward the river they followed, hypnotized by a melody no mortal throat could hum. Villagers watched as the piper walked into the tide. Water reached his knees, then his chest, yet the tune never faltered. The rats waded after him until the river's black mouth swallowed them whole. When he stepped back onto the shore, not a single whisker remained. The burgomaster feigned joy, but when the piper named his price, 500 guilders and the town's great silver bell, the council balked. They offered a single purse, light as flattery. The piper's eyes glimmered winter white. "Pay by gold," he said, voice hollow as a crypt, "or pay by blood." The council laughed behind their hands. The piper bowed. So be it. That night Hamelin slept soundly for the first time in a year. The next night the children woke from their beds and stepped barefoot into the frost, one by one, in silence. Their eyes were blank as paper. Their hands hung loose at their sides. And from somewhere far off, beneath the hills, beneath the trees, beneath the skin of the earth itself, a flute was playing, soft and sweet and hollow. At dawn, mothers found cradles empty, beds cold, small shoes lying weeping at doorsteps. All 130 children were gone, save 3. A blind girl who heard only silence, a deaf boy who saw only a crimson coat passing, and a lame child whose twisted legs slowed him too much to follow. Search parties scoured woods and riverbanks, but found only paw prints, not child-size, but small clawed tracks, 5 toes tipped with pinprick nails. As though the children had never walked at all, scurried. Seasons turned. Winter iced the river, yet Hamelin's well water tasted of salt and sorrow. No birds nested in the chimneys. No child's laughter nodded in the lanes. The blind girl dreamed of a song dripping through her ceiling. The deaf boy woke screaming, eyes fixed on corners where dust spun in patterns like dancing rats. The lame child whittled a flute from willow and tried to force breath through it, but no sound ever came. Years later, a tanner dredging river mud hauled up a silver bell, tarnished black. Inside lay a length of red brocade and a flute of porous white bone. When the bell clanged, every lantern in town guttered out. Moonlight flickered like a dying pulse, and the air stank of wet fur. The burgomaster, older now and gray, ordered the relics locked away. Yet at night he heard the bell toll from an empty belfry, each note answered by tiny skittering beneath the floorboards of his mind. One thawing spring, the lame child, now grown crooked and quiet, followed the river upstream to the caves of the Wizard Gorge. In the half-dark, he found a tunnel lined with tooth-thin flutes and ragged scraps of child-sized clothing. Farther in, the cave widened into a cathedral of stalactites. There, in moon-milk light, 127 small skeletons lay stacked like firewood, skulls elongated, jaws sharp, ribs narrowed to brittle arches. Above them hung a tapestry woven from rat tails, depicting a tall figure in red leading children whose faces blurred to snouts as they marched. The grown child dropped his willow flute. It cracked. The shatter echoed like applause. Behind him a breath climbed the dark. Our choir lacks 3 voices. The piper stepped forward, ageless, coat unmarred. In his hand the bell gleamed, polished anew. He lifted the bone flute to lips that shouldn't breathe, yet cold music blossomed, and the stalactites quivered like tuning forks. The lame man's twisted legs straightened, bones popped. His screams warped to squeals. Fur spooled across his skin. He fell to all fours, shrinking, until he scrambled into the pile of remains, perfectly at home. Back in Hamelin, the blind woman woke to silence for the first time since childhood. The deaf man lifted his head, suddenly hearing skittering beneath the floorboards. They met by the frozen fountain as the silver bell tolled from nowhere, and together they walked compelled toward the river road, drawn by a melody only they could sense. Behind them, doors creaked open. Rats spilled into the streets, not fleeing but following. At the riverbank, the piper waited, bell in one hand, flute in the other. The blind woman raised a trembling palm, as if recognizing him by scent. The deaf man pressed his ear to the bone flute, tears streaking dirt down his cheeks. Hamelin's elders gathered torches, but wind tore flame to ribbons. They unsheathed swords, but metal corroded to red dust. Gold was heaped at the piper's feet, but each coin turned to scurrying rats and vanished into the flood of fur. The burgomaster fell to his knees. The piper played. The two remaining children, now adults whose memories had never healed, stepped into the river and were gone beneath churning black. The rats followed, wave upon wave, until the water itself writhed. When silence settled, the piper bowed and melted into the mist, leaving only ripples that stank of decay. Hamelin stands still. No child has been born there in a generation. At twilight, shop shutters rattle though no wind blows, and grain spoils in sacks before it's milled. Travelers avoid the river road where some nights a bell tolls beneath the water and tiny shapes bob just below the surface, listening. Because the debt was never gold. Because the song is never finished. Because somewhere downstream, a hollow flute still thirsts for breath, and the piper always collects his debts. That concludes our dark and twisted fairy tales. Stories you thought you knew, rewritten in shadow, sharpened with teeth, and set loose under the moon. We hope you've enjoyed these retellings, though enjoyed might not be the right word when the echoes of children's laughter, stitched mouths, and hungry wolves still linger in your mind. Thank you for joining us tonight at Whispers After Dark, where shadows speak and the night listens. If these tales left you uneasy, you'll find even more waiting in our other collections: haunted campgrounds, chilling morgue stories, legends from forgotten mountains, and Gothic audiobooks whispered straight from the grave. Check the playlists below and let the dark keep you company. Until next time, stay curious, stay cautious, and beware of the Whispers After Dark.